A lot of people have asked me what are web servers and how do they actually work? There's been a lot of mysticism around web servers for the past few decades, especially for people who don't work in the technology field. So I'm going to take a few minutes to explain what they are to anyone regardless of what industry they work in. So let's start with a very practical and common scenario. Let's say there are two people, Alice and Bob. Alice has a computer and Bob also has a computer. And let's say Alice's computer and Bob's computer are connected to each other, either through an actual physical cable that connects them together, or maybe they're both on the same Wi-Fi network or the same local area network. And let's say Alice and Bob work together in the same office, and Alice wants to be able to share files with Bob. One of the popular ways is if you want to share a file with someone, you can just add a file to your email as an attachment and email it to someone. But the downside to that is that it takes time. If Bob wants a file from Alice, Bob needs to notify Alice, please send me a document, and then Alice has to take a few seconds to open up her email, find the files, add it as an attachment, and then send it to Bob. So you can imagine that that's a very disruptive workflow if Alice is very busy, constantly running around in the office or driving around the city. That's a very inconvenient way for Alice to share files with Bob. So let's say instead that on Alice's computer, she has a folder called users. Under the users folder is a folder called Alice. Underneath the Alice folder is a folder called documents. And let's say Alice leaves her computer on, and Alice wants to share only the documents folder with Bob. And she wants to share it in a way in real time. Meaning, as long as Alice's computer is on, Bob can connect to the documents folder on Alice's computer at any time in the day and grab the files he needs without ever having to bother Alice. However, there is an extra challenge. The challenge is that Alice does not want Bob to access any other folder on her computer. For example, let's say Alice has a folder called Downloads. Alice does not want Bob to access the Downloads folder. And let's say Alice has another folder called Family Photos. Alice does not want Bob to connect to the folder called Family Photos. All right, and let's say we also have the reverse situation. Bob also has some folders on his computer, and he wants to share the Documents folder with Alice. And of course, Bob does not want Alice to access any other folders on Bob's computer. Okay. So this situation is a very common one, and it's been solved many times before in the past 10 or 15 years or so. This problem can be solved with what we call file sharing softwares. And there are countless file sharing softwares out there. One of the more popular ones you may have heard in recent years is Dropbox. So what you can do with Dropbox is that if you have it installed on your computer, you can actually right-click a folder and share it with anyone else. So let's say Alice has Dropbox installed on her computer. So then what she can do is she can right-click this Documents folder and say, share this folder with Bob if Bob also has Dropbox. And when she does that, as long as Bob also has Dropbox installed on his computer as well, he can actually connect to Alice's computer and just start looking at the contents of the Documents folder on Alice's computer. So that's what Dropbox does as a file sharing software. And there are many other ones. You may have heard something like Torrent from previous decade or maybe even this decade. Torrent was really popular for people to, let's say, right-click their movies folder and share all their movies with other people on the internet. So people can then connect to another person's computer and look in the movies folder and download any movie files that they want. Napster was really popular in the decade before this one as a way to share files in your music folder. So that's what file sharing software does. They make a folder or files on a computer accessible to anyone else who also has that same file sharing software. Now, there is a special type of file sharing software which we call web server software. And there are a lot of web server software out there. You may have heard of things such as Apache, Nginx, IIS, Tomcat. There's a lot to choose from. But they work very similar to the file sharing software I mentioned in the previous slide, but with a few slight differences. I'll try to demonstrate how web server software works with an example. So let's say we have Alice again with her computer, and she has the folders user, Alice, and then a folder called www.alicehomestead.com. This folder could have been named to anything else, but I chose to name that folder as www.alicehomestead.com. If Alice has the software called Apache installed on her computer, what she can actually do is right-click on www.alicehomestead.com and say, share this folder with anyone on the internet if that other person has either Firefox, Chrome, Edge, Safari, or Internet Explorer. So what that will do is then let's say Bob on his computer has Firefox installed. What he can do is he can type into Firefox www.alicehomestead.com/cat.jpg. And what that will do is Bob's computer will connect to Alice's computer and look in the www.alicehomestead.com and pull up the file cat.jpg. If Alice has other files on her computer like dog.mp4 or home.html, Bob could also type in those file names into Firefox and pull those same files out. Likewise, we can also reverse the scenario. If Bob has a folder on his computer called www.bobscats.com, and if Bob installed a web server software like Nginx on his computer, he could right-click on www.bobscats.com folder and share it with anyone in the world who has Firefox, Chrome, Edge, Safari, or Internet Explorer installed. And if Bob has files like car.jpg, skiing.mp4, or home.html inside his www.bobscats.com folder, anyone with a modern browser can pull up those same files as well. So that's how a web server software works. It basically makes a folder on your computer accessible to everyone else in the world if they have a web browser. Hopefully, by now, you understand what it means to host a website and that you know how to make a website viewable to the rest of the world. Conceptually, it really is as simple as you need a computer, you need folders in the computer, you need files in the folders, and you need something like a web server software to make the files and folders visible to the rest of the world. So this really means that you could actually start hosting your own website off of your own computer. A web server software like Apache is actually free for you to download and use because it is open source. So you can actually just download Apache, create a folder, put some files in the folder, and make a website that's viewable to the rest of the world right off of your computer. And this would work great for just a test environment or a development area. I wouldn't actually recommend doing this for a production usage for a few reasons. So let's say, for example, that you work for the police department and you create a folder on your computer called 911.com. Now, there's a few challenges here. The first one is a website like 911.com should be available all the time. It should never go down. If you're hosting a website off of your computer, your own personal computer for that matter, you can't guarantee the 100% uptime. For example, if there were a power outage in your neighborhood, then your computer might just lose power and the 911.com website would go down. Right? So that's the first reason, the uptime. The second reason why it's not advisable to host a production website off of your computer is for the traffic reason. So let's say you're actually hosting a website called youtube.com. A website like YouTube gets a lot of traffic every minute. It could be like millions of connections per minute. And you would need a very powerful computer to service that much traffic. And a very powerful computer typically means a lot of electricity. So if you try to host a really popular website, or any website for that matter from your home, leaving your computer on all the time, especially if there's a lot of traffic, your electrical bills are going to skyrocket. So those are a couple of reasons why it might not be advisable to try to host a production website off of your own personal computer. Instead, what you should consider is renting the computers of companies that have the infrastructure to support what you want to do. So I'll demonstrate with this diagram here. In this diagram, I've drawn lots of computers that belong to companies you probably recognize. So Google has a lot of computers, GoDaddy has a lot of computers, Bell has a lot of computers, and so does TELUS, Rogers, Verizon. The list of these companies goes on and on. You've probably also heard of companies like WordPress.com, Squarespace.com, Wix.com, HostGator, Bluehost, Namecheap. The list just goes on. All these companies can do the same thing. What they'll do is that they are willing to rent their computers to you for a pretty reasonable price. Some of them could be free, others could be $5 to $10 per month. For people with higher traffic, maybe you'll have to pay a little bit more. But they'll do pretty much what we've described in the previous slides. So let's say Rogers, for example, they may have a web server software like Apache installed on their computers. And on their computers, they might have a lot of folders like www.toronto.ca, cntower.com. And they've asked Apache to share these folders with the internet, so that if you go to Firefox and you type in toronto.ca/parkingtickets.html, what Firefox will do is that it's going to connect to the Rogers computer, look in the toronto.ca folder, and pull up the file parkingtickets.html, which will probably list information about how to pay your parking tickets. So what's great about using the computers of other companies like Rogers or Google is that they will guarantee they do a much better job at providing the uptime you need than you would have been able to on your own personal computer at home. So that's what it means to actually get shared hosting or get web hosting from one of these big companies out there. Okay. So in the next video, I'll talk a little bit more about what it actually means or what happens when you actually buy a domain name like a cntower.com or a pizzapizza.com. So stay tuned for that.